The brave Geraint, a knight of Arthur's court, a tributary prince of the bond one, of that great order of the Table Round, had married Enid, Eneol's only child, and loved her as he loved the light of heaven. And as the light of heaven varies now at sunrise, now at sunset, now by night, with the moon and trembling stars, so loved Geraint to make her beauty vary day by day, in crimsons and in purples and in gems, and Enid, but to please her husband's eye, who first had found and loved her in a state of broken fortunes daily fronted him in some fresh splendor, and the queen herself, grateful to Prince Geraint for service done, loved her, and often with her own white hands arrayed and decked her as the loveliest, next after her own self, in all the court. And Enid loved the queen, and with true heart adored her as the stateliest and the best and loveliest of all women upon the earth. And seeing them so tender and so close, long in their common love, rejoiced Geraint. But when a rumor rose about the queen, touching her guilty love for Lancelot, though yet there lived no proof, nor yet was heard the world's loud whisper breaking into storm, not less Geraint believed it, and there fell a horror on him, lest his gentle wife, through that great tenderness for Guinevere, had suffered or should suffer any taint. In nature were foregoing to the king, he made this pretext, that his princedom lay close on the borders of a territory wherein were bandit earls and caitiff knights, assassins and all flyers from the hand of justice, and whatever loathes a law. And therefore, till the king himself should please to cleanse this common sewer of all his realm, he craved a fair permission to depart, and there defend his marshes. And the king mused for a little on his plea, but last allowing it, the prince and Enid rode, and 50 knights rode with them, to shores of Severn, and they passed to their own land, were thinking that if ever yet was wife true to her lord, mine shall be so to me. He compassed her with sweet observances, and worship never leaving her, and grew, forgetful of his promise to the king, forgetful of the falcon and the hunt, forgetful of the tilt and tournament, forgetful of his glory and his name, forgetful of his princedom and its cares. And this forgetfulness was hateful to her. And by the people, when they met in twos and threes or fuller companies, began to scoff and jeer and babble of him, as of a prince whose manhood was all gone, and molten down in mere uxoriousness. And this she gathered from the people's eyes, this too the women who attired her head to please her, dwelling on his boundless love, told Enid, and they saddened her the more. And day by day she thought to tell Geraint, but could not out of bashful delicacy, while he that watched her sadden was the more suspicious that her nature had a taint. At last it chanced that on a summer morn, they sleeping each by either, the new sun beat through the blindness casement, of the room, and heeded the strong warrior in his dreams, who moving cast the coverlet aside, and bared the knotted column of his throat, the massive square of his heroic breasts, and arms on which the standing muscle sloped, as slopes a wild brook o'er the little stone, rhyming too vehemently to break upon it. And Enid woke, and sat beside the couch, admiring him, and thought within herself, was ever man so grandly made as he? Then like a shadow passed the people's talk and accusation of luxuriousness across her mind, and bowing over him, low to her own heart, piteously she said, "O noble breast, and all puissant arms, am I the cause? I, the poor cause, that men reproach you, saying all your force is gone. I am the cause, because I dare not speak and tell him what I think and what they say, and yet I hate that he should linger here. I cannot love my Lord, and not his name. Farly fair had I gird his harness on him, and ride with him to battle, and stand by, and watch his mighty full hand striking great blows at caitiffs and at wrongers of the world. Far better were I laid in the dark earth, not hearing any more his noble voice, not to be folded more in these dear arms, and darkened from the high light in his eyes, than that my Lord through me should suffer shame. Am I so bold, and could I so stand by, and see my dear Lord wounded in the strife, and maybe pierced to death before mine eyes, and yet not dare to tell him what I think, and how men slur him, saying all his force is melted into a mere effeminacy? O me, I fear that I am no true wife." Half inwardly, half audibly she spoke, and the strong passion in her made her weep, true tears upon his broad and naked breast. And these awoke him, and by great mischance he heard but fragments of her latter words, and that she feared she was not a true wife. And then he thought, in spite of all my care, for all my pains, poor man, for all my pains, she is not faithful to me, and I see her weeping for some gay knight in Arthur's hall. Then, though he loved and reverenced her too much, to dream she could be guilty of foul act, right through his manful breast darted the pang that makes a man, in the sweet face of her whom he loves most, lonely and miserable. At this he hurled his huge limbs out of bed, and shook his drowsy squire awake, and cried, "My charger and her palfrey!" Then to her, "I will ride forth into the wilderness, for though it seems my spurs are yet to win, I've not fallen so low as some would wish. And thou put on thy worst and meanest dress, and ride with me." And Enid asked, amazed, "If Enid errs, let Enid learn her fault. But if he, I charge thee, ask not, but obey." Then she bethought her of a faded silk, a faded mantle, and a faded veil, and moving toward a cedarn cabinet, wherewith she kept them folded reverently, with sprigs of summer laid between the folds, she took them, and arrayed herself therein, remembering when first he came on her, dressed in that dress, and how he loved her in it, and all her foolish fears about the dress. and all his journey to her, as himself had told her, and their coming to the court. For Arthur on Whitsuntide before held court at old Caerleon upon Usk. For there on a day, he sitting high in hall, before him came a forester of Dean, wet from the woods, with notice of a hart, taller than all his fellows, milky white, first seen that day. These things he told the king. Then the good king gave orders to let blow his horns for hunting on the morrow morn. And when the king petitioned for his leave to see the hunt, allowed it easily. So with the morning, all the courts were gone, but Guinevere lay late into the morn, lost in sweet dreams, and dreaming of her love for Lancelot, and forgetful of the hunt, but rose at last, a single maiden with her, to course, and forded Usk, and gained the wood. There, on a little knoll beside it, stayed, waiting to hear the hounds, but heard instead a sudden sound of hoofs. For Prince Geraint, late also, wearing neither hunting dress nor weapon, save a golden hilted brand, came quickly flashing through the shallow ford behind them, and so galloped up the knoll. A purple scarf, at either end whereof there swung an apple of the purest gold, swayed round about him as he galloped up, to join them glancing like a dragon-fly. In summer suit and silks of holiday, long bowed the tributary prince, and she, sweet and statelily, and with all grace of womanhood and queenhood, answered him. Late, late, Sir Prince, she said, later than we. Yea, noble queen, he answered, and so late that I but come like you to see the hunt, not join it. Therefore wait with me, she said. For on this little knoll, if anywhere, there is good chance that we shall hear the hounds. Here often they break covert at our feet. And while they listened for the distant hunt, and chiefly for the baying of Cabal, King Arthur's hound of deepest mouth, there rode, pull slowly by a knight, lady, and dwarf, whereof the dwarf lagged latest, and the knight had visor up, and showed a youthful face, imperious, and of haughtiest lineaments. And Guinevere, not mindful of his face, in the king's hall desired his name, and sent her maiden to demand it of the dwarf, who being vicious, old and irritable, and doubling all his master's vice of pride, made answer sharply that she should not know. Then will I ask it of himself, she said. Nay, by my faith, thou shalt not, cried the dwarf. Thou art not worthy even to speak of him. And when she put her horse toward the knight, struck at her with his whip, and she returned indigent to the queen. Whereat Geraint, exclaiming, Sure I will learn the name, made sharply to the dwarf and asked it of him, who answered as before. And when the prince had put his horse in motion toward the knight, struck at him with his whip, and cut his cheek, the prince's blood spurted upon the scarf, dyeing it, and his quick instinctive hand caught at the hilt, as to abolish him. But he, from his exceeding manfulness and pure nobility of temperament, wroth to be wroth at such a worm, refrained from even a word, and so returning said, I will avenge this insult, noble queen, done in your maiden's person, to yourself, and I will track this vermin to their earths. For though I ride unarmed, I do not doubt to find at some place I shall come at arms on loan or else for pledge, and being found, then will I fight him, and will break his pride, and on the third day will again be here, so that I be not fallen in fight. Farewell. Some actually say that the Arthurian legends have pre-Christian origins, which they do, but Arthur himself was in the 500s, I think was the case. Farewell, fair prince, answered the stately queen. Be prosperous in this journey, as in all, and may you light on all things that you love, and live to wed with her whom first ye love. But ere you wed with any, bring your bride, and I, were she the daughter of a king, yea, though she were a beggar from the hedge, and clothe her for her bridals like the sun. And Prince Geraint, now thinking that he heard the noble hart at bay, and now the far horn, a little vexed at losing of the hunt, a little at the vile occasion rode, by ups and downs, through many a grassy glade, and valley with fixed eye, following the three. At last they issued from the world of wood, and climbed upon a fair and even ridge, and showed themselves against the sky, and sank. And thither came Geraint, and underneath beheld the long street of a little town, and a long valley on one side whereof, white from the mason's hand, a fortress rose, and on one side a castle in decay. Beyond a bridge that spanned a dry ravine, and out of town and valley came a noise, as of a broad brook o'er a shingly bed, brawling are like a clamor of the rocks, at distance, ere they settle for the night. And onward to the fortress rode the three, and entered, and were lost behind the walls. So thought Geraint, I have tracked him to his earth, and down the long street riding wearily, found every hostel full, and everywhere was hammer laid to hoof, and the hot hiss and bustling whistle of the youth who scoured his master's armor. And of such a one he asked, what means the tumult in the town? Who told him, scouring still, the sparrow hawk, then, riding close behind an ancient churl, who, smitten by the dusty sloping beam, went sweating underneath a sack of corn. And yet once more, what meant the hubbard here? Who answered gruffly, the sparrow hawk. Then, riding further, tasked an armorers, who, with back turned and bowed above his work, sat riveting a helmet on his knee. He put the same self-query, but the man, not turning round, nor looking at him, said, Friend, he that labors for the sparrowhawk has a little time for idle questioners. Whereat Geraint flashed into sudden spleen. 1,000 pips eat up your sparrowhawk. Tits, wrens, and all winged nothings peck him dead. Ye think the rustic cackle of your borg, the murmur of the world. What is it to me, a wretched set of sparrows, one and all, who pipe of nothing but sparrowhawks? Speak, if ye be not like the rest, hawk mad. Where can I get me harborage for the night? And arms to fight my enemy. Speak. Whereat the armorer, turning all amazed, and seeing one so gay in purple silks, came forward, with the helmet yet in hand, and answered, "Pardon me, O stranger knight. Behold, a tourney here tomorrow morn, and there is scantly time for half the work. Arms? Truth, I know not. All are wanted here. Harborage? Truth, good truth, I know not, save, it may be, at Earl Geraint's, o'er the bridge." Yonder he spoke, and fell to work again. Then rode Geraint, a little spleenful yet, across the bridge that spanned the dry ravine. There musing sat the hoary-headed earl, his dress a suit of brayed magnificence, once fit for feasts of ceremony, and said, "Whither, fair son?" To whom Geraint replied, "O friend, I seek harborage for the night." Then Niniol, "Enter, therefore, and partake the slender entertainment of a house, once rich, now poor, but ever open-doored." "Thanks, venerable friend," replied Geraint. "So that ye do not serve me sparrowhawks for supper, I will enter, I will eat, with all the passion of a 12 hours feast, of a 12 hours fast." Then sighed and smiled the hoary-headed earl, and answered, "Graver cause than yours is mine, to curse this hedgerow thief, the sparrowhawk. But in, go in, or save yourself, desire it. We will not touch upon him, even in jest." Then rode Geraint into a castle court, his charger trampling many a prickly star, a sprouted thistle on the broken stones. He looked and saw that all was ruinous. Here stood a shattered archway, plumed with fern, and here had fallen a great part of a tower, whole, like a crag that tumbles from the cliff, and like a crag was gay with wilding flowers, and high above a piece of turret stair, worn by the feet that now were silent, wound, bare to the sun, and monstrous ivy stems clasped the grey walls with hairy fibred arms, and sucked the joining of the stones, and looked a knot beneath of snakes aloft a grove. And while he waited in the castle court, the voice of Enid, Geniel's daughter, rang clear through the open casement of the hall, singing, and as the sweet voice of a bird, heard by the lander in a lonely isle, moves him to think what kind of bird it is that sings so delicately clear, and make conjecture of the plumage and the form. So the sweet voice of Enid moved Geraint, and made him like a man abroad at morn, when first the liquid note, beloved of men, comes sliding over many a winded wave, to Bretagne, and in April suddenly breaks from a coppice, gemmed with green and red, and he suspends his converse with the friend, or it may be that the labor of his hands, to think or say, there is the nightingale. So fared it with Geraint, who thought and said, "Here by God's grace is the one voice for me." It chanced the song that Enid sang was one, of fortune and her wheel, and Enid sang, "Turn, fortune, turn thy wheel, and lower the proud. Turn thy wild wheel through sunshine, storm, and cloud. Thy wheel and thee we neither love nor hate. Turn, fortune, turn thy wheel with smile or frown. With that wild wheel we go not up or down. Our hoard is little, but our hearts are great. Smile and we smile, the lords of many lands. Frown and we smile, the lords of our own hands. For man is man and master of his fate. Turn, turn thy wheel above the staring crowd. Thy wheel and thou are shadows in the cloud. Thy wheel and thee we neither love nor hate. Hark by the bird's song, you may learn the nest, said Yniol. Enter quickly, entering then, right o'er a mountain of newly fallen stones. The dusky, raftered, many cobwebbed hall, he found an ancient dame in dim brocade, and near her, like a blossom vermeil wheel that lightly breaks a faded flower sheath, moved the fair Enid, all in faded silk, her daughter in a moment, though Geraint, here by God's rood, is the one made for me. But none spake word except the hoary earl. Enid, the good knight's horse, stands in the court. Take him to stall and give him corn, and then go to the town and buy us flesh and wine, and we will make us merry as we may. Our hoard is little, but our hearts are great. He spake the prince as Enid passed him, fain to follow, strode astride, but Yniol caught his purple scarf and held, and said, Forbear, rest, the good house, though ruined, O my son, endures not that her guest should serve himself. And reverencing the custom of the house, Geraint from utter courtesy forbore. So Enid took his charger to the stall, and after went her way across the bridge, and reached the town, and while the prince and earl yet spoke together, and came again with one, a youth that following with a costrel bore the means of goodly welcome, flesh and wine. And Enid brought sweet cakes to make them cheer, and in their veil enfolded manchet bread. And then, because their hall must also serve for kitchen, boiled the flesh, and spread the board, and stood behind and waited on the three. And seeing her so sweet and serviceable, Geraint had longing in him evermore to stoop and kiss the tender little thumb that crossed the trencher as she laid it down. But after all had eaten, then Geraint, for now the wine made summer in his veins, let his eyes rove in following or rest on Enid at her lowly handmaid work, now here, now there, about the dusky hall. Then sudden addressed the hoary earl, Fair host and earl, I pray your courtesy. This sparrow hawk, what is he? Tell me of him. His name? But no, good faith, will not have it. For if he be the knight whom late I saw ride into the that new fortress by your town, white from the mason's hand, then have I sworn from his own lips to have it. I am Geraint of Devon. For this morning, when the queen sent her own maiden to demand the name, his dwarf, a vicious undershapen thing, struck at her with his whip, and she returned indigent to the queen. And then I swore that I would track this caitiff to his hold, and fight and break his pride, and have it of him. And all unarmed I rode, and thought to find arms in your town, where all the men are mad. They take the rustic murmur of their board for the great way that echoes round the world. They would not hear me speak, but if ye know where I can light on arms, or if yourself should have them, tell me, seeing I have sworn that I will break his pride and learn his name, avenging this great insult done to the queen. Now, really, you should be respectful to everybody. But violence as a result of disrespect, well, violence to return violence is different than, Then cried Earl Yniol, art thou he indeed? Geraint, a name far sounded among men for noble deeds. And truly I, when first I saw you moving by me on the bridge, felt you were somewhat, yea, and by your state and presence might have guessed you one of those that eat in Arthur's hall at Camelot. Nor speak I now from foolish flattery, for this dear child hath often heard me praise your feats of arms, and often, when I paused, hath asked again, and ever loved to hear. So grateful is the noise of noble deeds, to noble hearts who see but acts of wrong. Oh, never had woman such a pair of suitors as this maiden. First, Nemours, a creature wholly given to brawls and wine, drunk even when he wooed. And be he dead, I know not, but he passed to the wild land. The second was your foe, the sparrowhawk. My curse, my nephew, I will not let his name slip from my lips, if I can help it, he. And when that I knew him fierce and turbulent, refused her to him, then his pride awoke, and since the proud man often is the mean, he sowed a slander in the common ear, affirming that his father left him gold, and in my charge, which was not rendered to him, bribed with large promises the men who served about my person, the more easily, because my means were somewhat broken into through open doors and hospitality, raised my own town against me in the night, afore my Ened's birthday, sacked my house from mine own earldom, foully ousted me, built that new fort to overawe my friends, for truly there are those who love me yet, and keeps me in this ruinous castle here, where doubtless he would put me soon to death, but that his pride too much despises me, and I myself sometimes despise myself. For I have let men be, and have their way, and much too gentle had not used my power. Nor know I whether I be very base, or very manful, whether very wise or very foolish. Only this I know, that whatsoever evil happened to me, I seem to suffer nothing, heart or limb, but can endure it all most patiently. Well said, true heart, replied Geraint, but arms, that if the sparrowhawk, this nephew fight, in the next day's tourney, I may break his pride.